Hoover's power and control reached far beyond Hollywood. He would, in fact, insinuate himself into the very heart of one of the most sensitive and important political movements in American history, a place where he should never have been. The most honored and respected black in American history, he was not without his enemies. And none was more vindictive than J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover saw King as a threat to the established social order, and thus a threat to Hoover himself. Even so, the vehemence of Hoover's attacks on King seemed somewhat out of proportion. Out of proportion or not, correspondent Thayer Walker has discovered that Hoover's assault on King is perhaps the most outrageous chapter of all in the secret files. Thayer?
There's no doubt about it at all, Mike. Hoover pulled out all the stops in his efforts to get King. At the time, Hoover's boss was Attorney General Robert Kennedy, and Hoover kept telling Kennedy that King's movement was infiltrated by communists. Finally, in September of 1963, Kennedy agreed to strictly limited wiretaps on King's activities. 3 taps were approved, 1 on King's Atlanta home, 1 on his office there, and 1 on his New York headquarters. That shred of legality was all Hoover needed. Disregarding Kennedy's limitations, Hoover soon had 14 more taps on King, and he was making plans to infiltrate King's movement with the few black agents the Bureau now had. He was also planning to use illegal break-ins to get even more compromising information. After Time magazine named King Man of the Year in 1962, an infuriated Hoover redoubled his efforts to smear and discredit him. These efforts took the form of an all-out surveillance of King and his movements. From the secret files.
Martin Luther King Jr. is to be in San Francisco from May 28 to May 31, 1964. It was indicated that King and his party would probably stay at the Sheraton Palace Hotel. Electronic coverage should be afforded King during this current visit.
In FBI jargon, electronic coverage simply means bugging. It was not an isolated incident. Almost everywhere King traveled, the FBI followed with its electronic eyes and ears. Shamelessly using the prestige of the Bureau, agents intimidated hotel officials in city after city to set King up in pre-bugged accommodations. This file shows how it was done.
We learn that Martin Luther King is in Detroit at the Statler Hotel with an associate. They have rooms 1270 and 1272. Our agents are secure in room 1274.
What was Hoover trying to hear in those bugged hotel rooms? Basically, he was convinced King was having sexual relations with women when he traveled. And information like that would be excellent grist for Hoover's blatant blackmail mill. When, for example, King visited the Schroeder Hotel in Milwaukee, Hoover's agents cabled him that their eavesdropping would not be productive because local police have taken a room close to the suite of rooms engaged by King so that protection might be afforded. The Milwaukee agents apparently felt that because police were nearby, King would be too careful to engage in any sexual activities. In his own handwriting, the director fired back this rebuke.
I don't share the conjecture. King is a tomcat with obsessive, degenerate sexual urges.
Needless to say, the surveillance was carried out. How intensive were Hoover's efforts? David Garrow, Pulitzer Prize-winning author of the civil rights history, Bearing the Cross.
And I think it's important to really emphasize that the degree of this hotel room recording that the FBI directed against King reached far beyond anything that really anyone has been subjected to in American history with regard to government surveillance of people's private lives.
Former presidential candidate Jesse Jackson served on Dr. King's staff and reflected on the civil rights leader's feelings about the surveillance.
I think his basic position was that there's no defense against ambush and sabotage and corruption at the highest levels of government. He never succumbed to the lifestyle that fear creates.
And we're going to say to this nation and this world, we ain't going to let nobody turn us around.
As Hoover continued his smear campaign, he raised the ante. He became intent upon leaking his sexual intelligence on King to the press in hopes that the news stories it generated might ruin King. But no reputable journalist printed Hoover's material. One of those approached was columnist Jack Anderson.
The transcripts and reports of some of these incidents were made available to me and were made available, I'm told, to other news people. In my own case, I didn't publish them. But the FBI made an undercover effort to discredit Martin Luther King.
Frustrated by its inability to rope in the news media, Hoover's FBI stooped to one of the shabbiest tricks in its history. A group of agents was authorized to put together a tape containing samples of what they felt was some of the most damaging recordings. The tape was sent anonymously to King's office, along with a letter which read in part, "Your end is approaching. King, there is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is." The tape was opened by Dr. King's wife, Coretta.
They mailed them to Dr. King's wife, a willingness to try to destroy his home as a way of intimidating him or controlling his actions. Again, that was so illegal and so immoral.
In December 1964, King requested a meeting with Hoover in an effort to end their war. To his face at the meeting with King, Hoover congratulated him for winning the Nobel Peace Prize. But after the meeting, the director's pettiness became evident. He later boasted to friends, "I never addressed him as Reverend or Doctor." By that time, Lyndon Johnson had become president, and he issued an executive order prohibiting wiretaps for any reason except national security. But Hoover kept right on bugging. In addition to evidence of illicit sex, Hoover wanted desperately to prove the King's movement was manipulated by communists. The tapes of those hotel room buggings have been ordered sealed by the courts until the year 2025. But we have been able to unearth the transcripts of certain FBI wiretaps on phone calls between King and a top advisor, New York lawyer Stanley Levison. The agency was certain that Levison was King's link to the Communist Party. But in all the transcripts, we found no reference to communism whatsoever. And even after his assassination in 1968, Hoover continued his effort to smear King. It involved Jack Anderson.
And they gave me the name of a dentist in Los Angeles whose wife they claimed Martin Luther King had been squiring. And they told me that the evidence indicated that this dentist had killed Martin Luther King in revenge. Oh, the wife knew Martin Luther King. The wife may even have been friendly with Martin Luther King. But the story was a fabrication, and they tried to plant that story.
The way Hoover got Bobby Kennedy to approve those King wiretaps is a classic example of how he used his secret files for blackmail. When Bobby first balked, Hoover threatened to make public an explosive affair between Jack Kennedy and a suspected Nazi spy. Bobby quickly agreed to the bugging. Mike?
Thank you, Thayer. And that John F. Kennedy file is one that we'll be disclosing in detail later tonight.
Next, John Lennon and the FBI, Hoover's desperate battle to put the rock star behind bars.